If you're an avid sports fan like me, then you're probably tuning on NFL Sundays, and you've probably seen this odd necklace that certain players are wearing, most notably Tony Pollard of the Dallas Cowboys. And at first glance, I thought, odd fashion statement, the white goes with the white, chokers were in back in, 1998. Hey, to each their own. But I had to do some Googling, and I was like, what the hell does Tony Pollard wear around his neck? And I found out it's called the Q collar. The device is supposed to help prevent traumatic brain injuries and most notably concussions. Because the NFL's tackling the concussion problem through helmets. They're designing different helmets that has different impact forces. Even in practices, they put those weird pads over the top of helmets. That way they can stop collisions that are unnecessary during practices. But Q Collar, or Q30, the company, decided to tackle it a different way. And it came from an idea of woodpeckers who constantly hit their heads and then aren't suffering concussions. It arrived at this idea that it wanted to increase the intracranial pressure of fluid. Because the way that concussions happen is through the sudden deceleration of forces. So you've got these players out there that are running, then a massive 260-pound linebacker comes, hits them, and it's a sudden stop, and then boom, concussed. Or they hit their head. You see that a lot where a player will hit their head on the turf and then concussed because it's that sudden deceleration, and then you got this slosh because your brain doesn't take up the entire cavity of your skull. So when there's a sudden deceleration, your brain lags behind, and then boom, there's a hit. What helps prevent that is that fluid in between your brain and your skull. So the Q30 is supposed to increase it by putting pressure on the veins in your neck, increasing the blood volume in your brain, and then thereby creating some sort of a seatbelt. That way your brain is a little more snug than normal. And one of the most notable athletes of the NFL who was pushed out of the game because of concussions is Luke Kuechly, who suffered his first concussion in 2015. And when you have your first concussion, you're more susceptible to repetitive concussions. And in 2017, he started testing the prototype of this Q-collar device, and he praises it. He says that it elongated his career, but he did suffer subsequent concussions with the device. So that's kind of the quotes around whether or not this device actually does what it does. And I'll be the first to tell you, I have no relationship. I just a huge curiosity in sports technology. So I want to do the additional research. What are the arguments for? What are the arguments against? Well, a glaring one against is if the device actually worked as intended, why doesn't every NFL player wear this device? It's only $200. These are multimillionaires. You got to protect your brain. Every time they get concussed, they get carried off the field or they get pushed out of the sport completely. And it's not just in football, it's in all contact sports. So for $200, it seems like the ROI is X multiple of anything that you could get back to stay on the field. And that kind of is a glaring issue. Why doesn't every NFL player wear this device? Well, I had to do some additional digging. It is an FDA approved device. But the interesting thing is, when you dig into the FDA result, it itself says that it does not necessarily prevent concussions. A lot of the studies that were submitted on behalf of Q30, even funded and performed by themselves, was based on looking at certain physiological markers. Now, the logic and reasoning is there. By reducing certain markers, then it should equate to the prevention of traumatic brain injuries. But that's not necessarily a one-for-one logic in how the human body works. But the issue is that unless they actually give people concussions, they're not going to be able to know whether or not the device actually works. Where you have this control group not wearing the device and you're concussing them, and then you have this other group with the same forces that you apply to the control group wearing the Q collar and seeing whether or not they get concussed. It's just not feasible. And that's kind of what the FDA says. And because the device itself doesn't cause more harm than the risk to the user, they can approve it for the use of concussive prevention with certain stipulations, like it can't prevent the use of other things like a helmet that the NFL actually backs through their funding or any sort of other protective device, which it doesn't seem apparent since there are NFL players that do it. And the fact that Luke Kuechly promotes it and says it kept him on the field much longer than he otherwise would have been is an interesting concept. And the technical aspects of what it actually does logically make sense. Even the U.S. military decided to fund a massive round of getting devices out to their soldiers who are in hazardous situations that could lead to traumatic brain injuries. So there's some belief by the U.S. military that this could potentially work. And that's kind of the conclusion here. It's like for $200 and it doesn't hurt you, I would say that it's something that would be interesting to look into for a lot of players and to wear. There are colleges that look into it, high school teams that use it, and it does appear that concussions have reduced in environments that do wear the device. So it's kind of like the FDA argument. It doesn't hurt the players to wear it, and any additional protection just makes sense to me.